Zaki his son is your host on this most epic journey through pop culture's past. Hold on to your butts. This is Nostalgia Theater.
Brought to you by the Movie Film Podcast.
Hi everybody, welcome back to Nostalgia Theater. This is Zaki, and one of the cool things about having a show like this is it gives me a chance to share some of the things I love with those of you out there in the audience, and that certainly applies to the topic of this episode. I'm talking about Human Target. This is a series that aired on the Fox network for 2 seasons, starting almost exactly 10 years ago, and it's based on a long-running DC Comics character, but the show starred actor Mark Valley in the role of Christopher Chance, a bodyguard for hire, who would get into various fisticuffs and daring-do every week alongside Shy McBride and Jackie Earle Haley. Now, this was a show that really came out the gate strong. Great cast, great production values, fantastic theme music, which you just heard at the top here by Bear McCreary. And really, it was cinematic and it just immersive. It really dropped you into this fun action-adventure world. The second season was, if I'm being honest, not as good. And I think that's unfortunately some of just what happens in TV production. The dreaded notes process tends to take a shiv to a lot of the things that we like. But I'm here to talk about that whole process with my guest for this episode, who is none other than the Human Target himself, actor Mark Valley, who, if you have not seen the Human Target, you know him from Boston Legal. You know him from Keen Eddie. Maybe, well, that show lasted even less time than Human Target, so you might not know him from that, but that's another great show that he was on. And he's had a very long and illustrious career, and so I'm very excited to have him with me for the hour. His current project is an ongoing podcast called The Live Drop, a human experiment, where he talks to various intelligence professionals. So I'm excited to have him here with me. Mark, thank you so much for coming on Nostalgia Theater.
My pleasure, Zaki.
So 10 years after The Human Target, this is a show that was very near and dear to me, and not going to lie, I was a little bit crushed when it went off the air.
Thanks. I mean, for your concern, your lasting concern from 10 years ago. I was a little crushed too, to be frank, and but it was a real special experience for me at the time.
So we'll get there, but I wanted to work my way to it by going through some of the other highlights in your career. And I mean, just to start, I think the fact that you transitioned to acting, having served in the military, I was wondering, is that something that you had always intended to do, go into acting, or is that something that just kind of happened?
No, it wasn't something that I intended. I never really thought it was a possibility. But, going into the military, going to military school, that for me was something I wanted to do. I didn't really intend on making a full career out of it. I just decided to keep my options open.
So you were in your early 20s thereabouts when you joined the military.
I was about 19 when I first went to West Point.
Oh, wow. Okay.
From there you're considered on active duty, but you're at college and you're training over the summers. So yeah, that was like maybe 4 days after my high school graduation that I went there, and then it was 5 years thereafter. So I finished up in 1992, and I was about 28 years old, I think.
When you wrapped up?
When I got out, yeah.
And so you served during Desert Storm?
Yes.
Wow, I lived in Saudi Arabia at the time that Desert Storm happened.
Really? Where were you?
I was living in Riyadh. I was like 10.
Oh, you're in Riyadh. Yeah. Yeah, I was in Dammam and Dhahran mostly.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so I got to see a lot of that beautiful. Are you from Saudi Arabia originally? Your parents were just living there?
No, I'm from Chicago, but my family, we moved there when I was 3, so I spent about 10 years of my childhood there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the nice thing about Dhahran, where, that was, we did not live there, but they had Aramco TV, so they had all the American shows.
Oh, Aramco TV. Yeah, we stayed in, originally when we first got there, we stayed in these floating barracks that they made for Aramco employees.
Oh, okay.
And, then, of course, Scud missiles were dropping and things got a little crazy. But yeah, I ended up working in a transportation unit, and we were just sort of running supplies up and down the pipeline road.
Oh man, what an experience! I'm sure.
Yeah, King Khalid Military City was a place we went to. We went to Kuwait one time.
Oh wow, okay, yeah.
Yeah, that was an interesting experience.
We had some pictures going up on the roof, taking pictures of the Patriot missiles shooting down the Scuds.
Oh, you did?
That's like initially we were really scared, and then we were like, oh no, they're all getting shot down. So everyone would go on the roof and take pictures.
Yeah, that was the thing. You hear the Patriot go off, and there'd be like a little boom after, right? If it got the
right,
if it got the missile, like boom, boom. Oh, good, that's cool. It was like a Fourth of July with the stakes. The stakes were a little higher. It was like 4th of July, but
right. I remember when AFRTS would that started playing. It was probably like 90. And as a kid, I was just so excited to have like this little piece of America and American radio shows and American commercials. And I remember when AFRTS stopped, and I was like, oh man, it's like, it just went away. It was really sad.
Things went a little dark.
Yeah.
God, what's it like growing up in Riyadh? I remember that when we were there, they were making a big deal about it because I think about maybe 24 women had gotten together and had commandeered cars and started driving them around the city of Riyadh.
Yeah,
and
sure.
It was like a demonstration that one. I think it was like when was it, 1991 or something?
That sounds very familiar. Yeah.
Yeah, and but that sort of went away, I guess. I don't know if women can drive there or not.
I think now they're allowed to, I believe, under the new guy who has other issues. So I'm like, well, that's one nice thing that he's done, but he's done a lot of shitty stuff otherwise. But growing up there, it's very interesting because I think back on it and I'm like, you're a kid, so you're not thinking about the socio-political aspect of sort of everything, right? So that the idea that women have to cover up and aren't allowed to drive, you don't think about that in the same way. But I think back on it now and I'm like, well, that aspect of it is really awful, but it's hard to separate from just having been a kid there, and so you have sort of residual good memories of just being a kid.
Sure, yeah.
But regardless, so what prompts the switch? You finish with the service, and pretty much right away you start acting.
Yeah, pretty much. I was living in Berlin for the most part. I was stationed there, which was kind of a fun city with a lot going on. It's the first time I'd really lived in a big, kind of cool, interesting metropolitan area with some time on my hands. So I sort of took a look around and thought, oh, what are some things that I could do or would like to do? But I worked as an extra on a movie, and that sort of lit the spark for me. I realized, oh, this is something interesting I want to learn about. And I felt like I wanted to join the circus. I felt like the easiest way into the business was as an actor, to be frank, because I just and they seem to be treated better than everyone else. At least on the set. While the irony is, on the set while they were working, they were treated a lot better. While everybody. But yeah. So I thought I'll give this a shot. So yeah, and then I went to like an acting class in Germany, and I was still in the Army at the time and kind of taking time off when I could, but I was taking an acting class, and then I realized, okay, I've got to go back to the States. I was like a civilian in Berlin for a while, just living on people's couches, trying to make a go of it there, but realized I really had to go back and train. So I went back to New York, and a couple of years later, I ended up on a soap opera and came to Los Angeles, and kind of been working on and off ever since.
Well, and sort of just looking at the scope of your filmography, I'm sort of fascinated by the fascinating people you've gotten to work with. I watched the George Wallace miniseries back when it aired, and I truly had no idea that was you as Bobby Kennedy. I mean, I just didn't even make the connection because I saw it 23 years ago.
Oh wow!
And I would love to know what it was like to work with John Frankenheimer.
Oh, wow. Interesting question. Yeah. Chris Carr asked me the same thing. He does a podcast called the Dry Cleaner Cast. And, it's always nice to hear somebody that likes John Frankenheimer. He was very much like at least from my limited experience of him, you know, I got to know him a little bit. He was a friend of Bobby Kennedy's.
Mm-hmm.
You know, had driven him to the, you know, to the hotel and everything in Los Angeles. So it was kind of a personal,
amazing.
You know, it was a personal thing for him. But to be able to play that character for that director was really kind of an honor for me. You know, he seemed to be like a documentarian at heart, because he just from the scenes that I was in, he seemed to, you know, kind of kick off rehearsals, and then everyone was doing their thing, and he sort of seemed to be prowling around the perimeter of things, kind of watching and looking for angles of where to jump in. And, you know, then of course he set up all his shots and went from there. It felt like he didn't have his shots planned out ahead of time, that he kind of took them from what the action was or what things felt like in the room. And I thought that was kind of unique at the time, because I'd been working on television where it was like, hurry up, stand here, we're going to shoot you. What? You know, get on your mark. We're going to, you're not going to get shot. No, you won't cover it. You know? So it was interesting to look at a director who worked that way. And then I started getting into his, you know, his work and watching his films, and realized, oh my gosh, I worked with a pretty important figure.
Yeah, I mean, I screen The Manchurian Candidate in my classes every semester. So I've been watching The Manchurian Candidate twice a year for you know, more than 10 years at this point.
Oh, right.
And
yeah.
I mean, it's like that's the kind of film where if that's the only film you ever made, you're still a legend.
Yeah, absolutely. And even like Ronin, which was kind of commercial, but it was still like a great spy film. You know, he's just got some great things that he's done. And yeah, I remember him like asking a lot of questions, not necessarily of me, but just he just seemed to be kind of digging for the truth on set, if I remember correctly. And he worked till he was pretty old. I mean, he must have been in his 80s, and he was still, you know, working and developing other things.
He was 72. That's young enough where you could easily have seen him.
He wasn't that old.
Yeah,
he wasn't that old, was he?
That's a shame.
Yeah.
First time I sort of became aware of you as a presence was on Keen Eddie.
Oh, cool.
Which that's another one that it came and it went very quickly. But when you look at sort of everybody involved, not just you, but Sienna Miller, Colin Salmon. I mean, this was like a quality show, really before its time.
Yeah, it did have. I mean, at the time, it was sort of like a Guy Ritchie. It was using a lot of techniques he did. But one of the things it did, I realized while we were shooting it, is we would get a director occasionally that would come in, and there would be this, you know, long drawn out scene of somebody walking down the stairs and walking into a room. I remember we'd all sort of gotten with this rhythm of like, you know, we don't really shoot that stuff. Or if we do, we kind of, you know, we speed the camera up, and so it can just be sort of fast forward. We cut. The thing I liked about that show and appreciate it now as like a writer as well, is that it really got into this. It started this. There wasn't a lot of shoe leather. There wasn't a lot of wasted time, wasted. So, and in retrospect, I wonder if, you know, that was one of the reasons it didn't really go, because people suddenly were, wait a minute, we're in London? What's going on here? So I don't think people were really quite ready to make that geographical jump to another place. But they didn't really waste, like I said, they didn't waste a lot of time with, you know, kind of setups and meandering around. It jumped into the scene at a pretty crucial time and got out as well. And
that one, I mean, I think Fox, like, they just chopped it off after like 6, I think, right?
I can't remember. It wasn't much. Yeah.
I mean, I remember very distinctly watching the premiere, and then very shortly thereafter, they're like, all right, see ya.
Yeah. What was it? I'm trying to think if there was any. I remember they kind of moved it. It was supposed to go, and then they moved the date, and then it was right after, I think. I mean, they gave it kind of a strange shot. They put it on after American Idol, I think, if I'm not mistaken. And then they just sort of moved the time around. And I mean, back then Fox was just looking for like American Idol had sort of set the bar for what a TV show can do.
Sure.
Like, you get a whole bunch of people watching it. So I think they weren't really like, oh, we're not going to let something grow here.
So Keen Eddie that's your first time as the lead.
Yes.
So I was wondering if you could talk about that. I mean, what is that ethos like? Does that carry like when you have that opportunity presented to you? Is there a different level? I mean, obviously there's a level of pressure involved, but I mean, how does that manifest on set? How do you perceive that transition from being, a supporting actor to suddenly you're the Eddie of the title?
Yeah. God. Well, first of all, that show was just so much fun, and I tried to think like, why did it really work? Why was it such a good time? I just remember the AD would knock on my door, and I would just be like bursting out of my trailer to get to set to shoot the next scene for the whole season. It was exciting like that. Yeah, the lead of a show, and I did it a few times. The lead of the show is in a strange position because you don't really have this higher fire power, you're not really, unless you're like an executive producer or something
Sure.
like that, or a producer, you don't really have this, but you're number one on the call sheet. So there's something about it that's like a constitutional monarchy, is you don't, you know what I mean? They don't really have power, but you don't really want to piss them off, and, but not piss them off because of consequence, but piss them off because you sort of want the number one, and generally they show up happy and they're happy to do the show and they want to do the show. You don't want to kind of spoil that party for them.
That's interesting
because it just sort of makes everybody else miserable. Because a lot of people are spending their time looking at you, whether it's what you're wearing or where you're standing or whether you're in focus or whether you're kind of on the scene or on the set or you're rehearsing. A lot of people, it's their job that they have to look at you, and with that sort of level of, like, I'd say almost passive influence, you really want to be in a good mood every day. And if people are working as a team, they want to help you to be in a good mood. And, it's possible that people can kind of exploit that as well, where they become babies or, start pouting or panting around. But, one of the funny things about it is that it is sort of a strange ranking system, number one. But I always think the responsibility kind of really relies on number two and number three, because if they don't believe in this system, if they're not supportive of number one, they're kind of saying F you to the whole production,
Wow.
So
okay.
It's a funny little thing, but like I said, it's people. I think the most significant thing is that it's part of everyone's job on a scene is to kind of be looking at you in one way or another, and your mood and your attitude really has a lot of influence.
It's what you're saying, what you're describing reminds me of an interview that Gordon Clapp gave, like back in the early '90s, shortly after David Caruso left NYPD Blue. After like the first season, he had this big falling out, and he talked about how the lead actor or actress sets the energy level for the whole set, and there was this palpable upsurge in energy when Caruso left and Bobby Simone, who was played by Jimmy Smits, when he comes on, and that's, I don't mean to pick on Dave Caruso, but I mean that's always stayed with me. That idea, what you talk about, kind of like passive power.
Yeah, I always joke around. I said, God, it was a lot funnier when I was higher on the call sheet because there's a certain amount of secret. Like I made the same joke when I was number one as I was number 17, and nobody laughed when you're number 47 on the call sheet. But it becomes something that you just, it's just part of the business and you look at it. But yeah, you do have you have an ability to kind of set a tone for a show. And not just like whether you're happy, but also how you treat people. Are you taking accountability for yourself? Are you being friendly? Are you engaging? Are you listening to other people? Are you taking other people into account? There's that, but there's also a challenge with it because sometimes some of these shows can be really demanding physically. And as you probably know, when you're driving in traffic or something, the first thing to go when you're really tired is your sense of humor. And you can be a real miserable person sometimes when you're, kind of tired or we get cranky sometimes, but number one can't get cranky. So
And I mean, you're going to be the one who ends up with some of the longest days, probably.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Well, just picking up on what you're saying, I mean, this is your first show as a lead. Can you talk about having to deal with the news that this isn't going to go? 13 episodes and done. Like, what happens to an actor who gets this opportunity and then sort of has to process, oh, and now it's gone? Is that something you were able to deal with easily, or was that something that you really had to process?
Well, first of all, working on 1980 was cool. I was the only American there, which was fun. Not so much just that I was exotic or anything, but that I was just surrounded by a lot of really professional English actors who didn't really take it that personally, if that makes any sense. It's a little more of a blue collar job over there. I mean, of course, there is the entertainment, the publicity side of everything, and fame and all that. But it is like it's much more like a blue collar job, that people like to take pride in, and they do it well, and then they go home, and that's the end of it. So I was fortunate in that I was working around a lot of people who took their work really seriously, but didn't really take themselves that seriously.
I see.
All that said, I didn't have to deal with that disappointment in front of the whole production, because I think they pushed our shoot. I think we'd actually finished shooting the show before it actually aired.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Yeah, or we were far enough ahead that we finished while it was still on the air. I can't quite remember. But I do remember going, we had a little premiere for it, and Julian was there, and Sienna, and yeah, we all had high hopes, but we had also finished shooting the first season. So
kind of mentally, you're like, well, this may not be a distance thing, and if not, it's just this fun little experience I had.
Yeah, I mean, it was my first. It's not like my previous job went 7 seasons or anything.
Right, that's true.
For me, it was. Yeah, it was a bit abrupt, but it was at the time, it was probably a pretty exciting pilot to get on to do. It's like, oh, you're going to be shooting in England, but I think everybody knew at the time that it was a bit of a risk. We're shooting in a style that people weren't used to. It was like a drama, comedy. What is this? And although for me, I just really tonally, I just sort of melded right into it. I think it was something everybody knew was going to be a bit of a risk. So,
yeah,
do what you can. I had a good experience.
Well, you talk about the difference between being number 1 versus being number 2 or 3. And with Boston Legal, you do end up becoming like 3 or 4, but it's to, William Shatner and James Spader, et cetera. So that's a pretty good roster to be a part of.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I showed up on that set and I was like, well, I don't think I'm really going to be like leading man on the show. I mean, it was just some pretty high caliber, talent walking around. And for that show, I just tried to enjoy myself. And that was fun because I could actually play a specific character. I could kind of work on this one character who was a little bit more uptight, politically probably much more farther right-leaning than I am. So that was kind of a character actor job in a strange way.
And I wanted to ask about that because so you played Brad on Boston Legal. And first of all, I would imagine there's just a special joy in being able to recite David E. Kelley's dialogue.
Yeah, there's a joy because it just there's a rhythm to it. There's grammatically it's elegant, it's substantial. He's got something to say, and it's not just exposition. So yeah, there's definitely a joy.
And the character, it's funny because when we look at the timing, I mean, this show started very shortly after 9/11, and it does feel like to a large extent David E. Kelley was sort of having a political conversation very specific to that moment vis-a-vis the Alan Shore character and Brad Chase. How did you, I should say, approach not letting that character become, a cartoon? I mean, it's like we still like Brad, even though sort of narratively, Alan is always kind of like the person who the audience is like on his side.
It's funny you asked that. Somebody asked William Shatner the same question at the, I don't know, it was some awards thing or some dinner or some panel. And funny because he said, what you refer to, that's the same question. He said, what you refer to as a character or a cartoon is in fact, for me, reality.
Okay.
Next question. And that really stuck with me because I remember with Brad, I remember just thinking, well, that's how he thinks. It's how I am. If you don't believe it, that's not my problem. And I think, you know, I had some big guns to imitate while I was doing that.
So you were a regular on Boston Legal for, I think, the first 3 seasons. Was it your decision to leave?
Yeah. It was 3 seasons and it was a lot of fun. I mean, for me, I you know, all the shows I've been on like 1 season or 2 seasons long, and 3 seasons just felt like, oh my God, I'm going to be here the rest of my life. But I had a really wonderful experience, and I thought, you know, here's probably a chance for me to do something else. And so I just sort of moved on to some other things.
I remember seeing you on Boston Legal, and I had this thought, and I have to imagine you've had other people tell you this. I was like, man, he would be a great Captain America.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, some other people had mentioned that.
It's a shame that didn't happen, but you did get to play another comic book character very shortly thereafter, which is, of course, the Human Target, which is why we're here. At what point in that process do you end up getting involved?
Well, I'd heard that this creator was like, you know, I'd said to the director, hey, you know, we're looking for like a Mark Valley kind of type. You know, he'd just seen Keen Eddie, and he really liked it. And the director was Simon West, who had also directed the pilot of Keen Eddie and was one of the producers on that.
Oh,
and
nice.
Simon said, well, you know, he's still alive. I mean, you want to call him up? So, that started to take shape, and that's probably how I got into it.
Well, that's got to be a nice feeling. You are a type.
Yes. You know, it was a good feeling. You had to be a type.
So the show now the Human Target, and this is for people listening who may not know this, Human Target had previously been turned into a TV series in like 92, I want to say, starring Rick Springfield.
Yes.
So can you sing Jesse's Girl? That's the question.
Jesse's Girl. Was it Jesse? Yeah, I can probably sing that.
There you go. So you guys are even.
It must have been such a great job, though, right? Because I watched the pilot of it. Rick Springfield essentially was in the opening credits.
Yes.
He'd go in, he'd kind of amble in and meet the boss in his stonewashed jeans, you know, and, you know, flip his hair back, and you'd say, oh, you've got to be a,
That's right.
you know, like a, you know, you've got to be a Argentinian, you know, drug czar or something. And then he would go into this little machine, right? He'd sit in this machine where they'd redo his face, and then he was done for the episode.
That's exactly right.
So,
Yep.
like, he had like 2 scenes, and then I don't know, maybe in the end there was like some epilogue or something. Right?
You'd have like Arlie Ermy for the episode.
Arlie Ermy did an episode of that?
I believe he did. Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
And it's funny because a couple of years ago I talked to Danny Bilson, who produced that version of the show, and that was kind of what I said. I was like, what as a fan I had trouble with is like, well, Christopher Chance, like we're following him, but we're not really following him because it's not really him, it's the other guy. And you know, the point he made was, yeah, it was great because that's like how we can focus on like a great guest star. And I was like, man, it's interesting how the thought process there. I can see that, like why you do it, but I also see as an audience member why they would just check out.
Yeah. I mean, it might work now as like some kind of anthology thing or something like Black Mirror, you know, you sort of brought somebody on, but I don't think people were really quite ready for that.
Well, so that's the biggest change that happens in the conception of your version, which is, well, we're not going to have him put on a mask for the whole episode and be somebody else. We're just going to have him sort of insinuate into the situation, which makes it much more of a. I was watching a couple episodes to sort of, you know, prep for this, and I was like, this is Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible. That's what this show is.
I remember asking the showrunner about it because I was doing my due diligence and reading the graphic novels and looking through the comic books and coming up to him and saying, hey, there's something about this Human Target guy. I don't know if you guys know it, but yeah, he kind of becomes like another person in every episode. And, you know, am I going to be able to do, I was gung-ho to do it. I said, you know, I mean, I could just do a different accent or do a different, just play a different character as myself. And they said, no, we don't want to do that. If we want to keep the show's got to get used to one person, sort of one persona, and that's what we're going to kind of hang the show on. So I think what we ended up doing was, you could speak some languages and there were some costumes, but for the most part, it was sort of this Mission Impossible thing.
And I mean, right now we're in an age where like comic book shows are just everywhere. I mean, the CW, that's like half their lineup, if not more. And it really does feel like, man, this show just kind of beat the zeitgeist by maybe like 3 years. Watching it now, you're like, well, geez, 10 years later, this thing still holds up.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Thank you. That's interesting to hear. That was funny. I remember doing it and, getting into this character and realizing, okay, getting into his mythology. And I think that is probably one of the differences you see with the comic book shows is, there's a certain jump with comic book shows where it's like, hey, look, I'm made of rock, whatever. I got a steel suit. I'm okay. There's certain things that you had to just kind of accept. But there was one of the things that always sort of bothered me about Human Target was that this guy, he was an assassin. Like he just went around shooting people professionally,
Yeah.
And he's going to make this big character turn because he's in love. I mean, how is this going to work, guys? And it's like, no, just shut up. It's just the way it is. So, yeah. So I sort of just tried to make it work. But I remember saying, there's like an emotional turn here that this guy has to have, or this sort of revelation, or this sort of awakening that he has to have. Because I don't know. I mean, it's cool. A lot of people, it really bothered me that people are like, oh, it's cool. He's an assassin. I'm like, yeah, but assassins kill people. Then they have to constantly be repressing that guilt, unless they're a sociopath.
Yeah.
And then when you're a sociopath, you're going to have a completely different emotional experience of life. So anyway, that was the only complaint you really got from me doing the show was, hey guys, how are we going to fit this whole backstory in?
Yeah.
And so I just my solution to that was just to kind of make him a little moody.
Sure.
I mean, he's just a little moody. So there you had it.
It's interesting. What you're describing reminds me of sort of the ongoing issue that Pierce Brosnan dealt with when he was playing James Bond. Was exactly what you're saying. Like he just had a very difficult time balancing the constant murdering with the quipping and sort of being able to find the real guy in between them.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting because he talked about how he would just like try to sneak in moments of just the guy underneath it in literally just shots in one movie or the other because, that whole, and this is like pre-Daniel Craig, like now, the whole Bond machine is built around a much more tortured Bond, but when Brosnan was doing it, it was it was like, no, we want to go back to Roger Moore.
Right.
And it's exactly what you're saying because yeah, Christopher Chance, it's like, until you bring it up, I'm like, yeah, no, that's a good point. Because we still, as a show, it has to be like, yeah, but he's doing this like thing and he's on top of the train and he's like cool and we want to be like him. I was like, do we?
Wow, that's fascinating. Yeah. Like as watching it as a viewer, you're like, oh, he's doing all this cool stuff. But but it's interesting because one of the things that I really enjoyed, and probably one of my last kind of strongest memories of the show, was doing stunts and doing fight scenes and all the physical stuff. Because you're not thinking of your backstory when you're trying to make your way down an elevator and somebody's shooting you. You're just like you're not a tortured guy when somebody's shooting at you. You're just trying to move, run, shoot, move, and get out of there. So that was a solution that I found. Oh wow, as long as I'm moving, as long as there's action, I don't really have to worry about lacing those two things together. The Pierce Brosnan question. Yeah. We should make a name for that. The Brosnan
paradox.
The Brosnan paradox. Yes.
Which sounds like a Robert Ludlum novel, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah. The Brosnan paradox. I suffered from the Brosnan paradox.
I'm gonna write that book just so that it exists, and then in the liner notes it'll be like, this started with the. Shy McBride is I get the feeling that Shy McBride is just Shy McBride, and it's like you just kind of you point a camera at him and just let him be sort of this force of nature.
Yeah, he's pretty much what you get. What you see is what you got, and there's a lot there.
Yeah, my buddy is executive producer of a Disney animated series, and he's just such a big Shy McBride fan that he was like, I want to get him on my show to do one of the voices. And it was just so that he could get to say he worked with Shy McBride.
Yeah, great cast on that show, man.
Well, and Jackie Earle Haley, I wanted to ask, I mean, to me, the first season, I wanted to talk about sort of the tonal shift between year one and year two, but I mean, the first season from the jump, the opening, the theme, Bear McCreary's theme is just so perfect and cinematic and amazing, and then you got this it's like an alchemical mix, the three of you. I mean, that I would imagine that just you being in the middle of it, you were able to appreciate, man, this is really something special.
Yeah, it was. It was a pretty special time, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
What was also, I mean, it was interesting. You're talking about like being number one or number two or number three. I mean, they're heavyweights as far as actors goes. You know, like Shy and Jackie. So it was written like it was written in a strange way. Like I was sort of the lead character, and they were kind of supporting me. Whereas, you know, we often tried to make it a little more of an ensemble. We would kind of give some of my lines to them just to sort of make it seem a little more even, you know?
Yeah.
And we tried to work it out a little more as an ensemble, I guess. But it's interesting because, you know, as like a lead of a show, you've got to really stand up for yourself and stand up for, you know, whatever it is that your character wants or whatever it is happening in the show. And, you know, that was probably one of the challenges with that. I was a little bit, you know, I mean, Kelly Leitz is the coolest kid in town.
Yeah.
And it took me a little while for that awe to kind of, you know, wane down and just sort of play my character. Another interesting thing about the show is that inherently it was a bodyguard is, there's something a little bit passive about it, you know?
Yeah.
And on one hand, the audience is sort of with them kind of waiting. It's almost a little more like it's a little bit different than Mission Impossible. I always felt it was a little more like a zombie show, you know? I mean, you're kind of waiting for the zombies to show up.
That's interesting. Wow.
When are those bad guys going to show up? Because it was, you know, what does my character want? Well, my character always, in almost every episode, it was more like what he didn't want to happen.
Right.
You know, so it was a challenge, I think, to kind of write it so that, you know, his preparation and his reactions were a little more in line with what was going on. But that said, it's such a great cast, and Jackie had his own thing going on, that character Guerrero. So I liked how, you know, Chance kind of kept him at arm's distance a little bit. I mean, they're friends; they knew they could trust each other. But it was like, I don't want to know how the sausage was made with that guy. But yeah, we're all still friends, and we're all still text each other occasionally. It's cool.
And Jackie Earle Haley had just recently sort of come back with little children, and so I mean, I remember it was a pretty big deal when he signed on to be on the show. It's like, oh my gosh, it's the guy from the Oscar nominee who just, you know, his comeback had sort of been a story.
Yeah. But it did. I mean, at the time, it just seemed like Jackie he's just like a really good guy who wants to work hard and have a good time with people and make friends. And, you know, we all weren't really aware of like the status of our careers at the time. It was more like, you know, just having a laugh, you know, we're all working and having a good time. Let's just make the best of it.
Well, and the final episode of the first season, you got to act opposite somebody who I would assume was kind of an icon for you growing up, and that's, you know, Steve Austin himself.
Lee Majors.
Lee Majors, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's funny. I'm working on a show right now, CBS's Blood and Treasure. And I've just done a few episodes, but I'm working with Jamie Summers.
Oh, wow. Okay. Lindsay Wagner. and
So stick around long enough. All your childhood heroes showing up. My life is just a parade of all my childhood heroes, you know.
But that's pretty friggin' cool.
It's very cool. It's very cool. Yeah. Lee Majors is such a great guy, you know, and somebody who, you know, had been on the top, and he's just a really, really good guy. And, somebody I still keep in touch with him, and,
really,
you know, ask him for business advice every once in a while. We're like, man, how do you do this? But, I just get new knees and give it a go. But he's, I remember at the time I mentioned him in a magazine or something, and somebody asked me, like, oh, who are your favorite action people? And I mentioned Lee Majors, and he called me. And I talked to him on the phone, and then kind of thought, why doesn't he, maybe he can get on this show. So they ended up writing him on as like the original Christopher Chance. Yeah.
That's so cool. I had no idea that was the backstory.
I was just so excited that he called me up, and I waited about 3 or 4 days and just told everybody that I, you know, have to return a call to Lee Majors. You know? Brag, like, why don't you just stop bragging about it and call him, Mark? I'm like, all right, cool. So finally I called him. Yeah.
I picture you at the drive-thru of McDonald's, like, I can't talk right now. I got to return a call to Lee Majors. And you just drive off.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, what? I can't talk, sir.
So for me, I felt there was a marked tonal shift between the first and second season, and I was wondering if that was something you could talk about. I mean, there was a change in showrunners. Was that something that, like, how did you perceive that?
You're being very diplomatic about this. It's funny. One person came up to me, like, some people say, hey, you know, it's Hematology, like, so somebody I don't even know came up to me and said, hey, I loved you on Hematology. I'm like, oh, thanks. He goes, I'm really sorry about the second season.
Jeez.
And I was like, then it was still 9 years later, and I was like, you know what, dude, that's sweet of you, but it's too close. It's still too close. It's too soon. It's too soon. It's too close. So, you know. But yeah, but I'm interested in your perspective. What was the tonal shift from your perspective? From your
gosh. You know, there's a quote I remember somebody said in reference to a script we had, and they said, when something works, you don't pee on it to make it better. And I'm not going to say the second season was like peeing on it, but I'm just like, it was already working. Like, the changes that were made didn't need to be changed.
Yeah. They were all my idea, actually.
Really?
No, I'm kidding.
I'm going to hang up now and just like walk into traffic.
It was all my idea. No, here's the thing with that show is immediately they were like, they wanted another 24. It wasn't getting that kind of ratings.
Yeah.
And that's one thing I look back on now and I realize, you know, I probably could have played I probably had a little more influence than I knew that I had at the time. I mean, I probably could have said, hey, here's what I want this show to be like. Here's what this is, or here's what's working. Here's what I think is working. You know, looking back on it, I just sort of felt, well, I just worked really hard. You guys are the ones that make all these crazy decisions. You know?
Okay.
I'm not a producer on this show. I'm just an actor who's doing his best here. And it's kind of a little bit before social media had come on, where people were starting to be actors were starting to be a little more, you know, with their individual presence. A lot of publicity was still through the studios and so forth, or with individual publicists through whatever those other channels were. So, that said, it happened pretty quickly. But I just remember Warner Brothers was like, you know what, we're going to cancel the show unless we make some changes. And here's your choice. Either you don't do a second season, or you do a second season with new characters and a new showrunner. Okay. How do you feel about that? And I thought, well, you know, maybe I can make it work with the changes. I mean, if maybe I look back now, I think maybe if I had just said no, frankly, if I had said no, there would have been one season of Human Target.
Yeah.
You know, and so that was kind of that was sort of where I was at as far as that goes. It was like Human Target was inside this other show, trying to get out the whole time. And it was just constantly being muffled. And I remember I might as well share it. I remember getting, really kind of, I don't know how to explain it. It was just, at a certain point, I realized what you're realizing right now, but I was actually working on the show all the time. And I just realized, oh my God, this is what this is now. And,
okay. Yeah.
It wasn't easy, but I remember, I soldiered through. Let's just do our work and work hard and try to keep the show on the air. And, if things are working, we'll keep them on. If they're not working, we'll kind of roll over it. But, they really wanted some more women on the show. And one of the things I didn't like about it was that it started to become this, I felt like, oh my God, we're doing one of these scenes where we're in the, whatever, Chance's apartment suddenly wasn't Chance's apartment anymore. It was, an office and all this other stuff. And Indira is a really, really good actor.
Oh, she's great. Yeah. And she was great on the show.
And she was really cool, and she was great on the show. But I just remember thinking, when did this become like a kind of family? Suddenly it felt like a family drama at some point. And that's what really kind of threw me, because I thought that didn't really start out like that. These were three kind of misfits who were sort of thrown together that are trying to help other people. And suddenly now there was this kind of a mom and dad family dynamic going on. And, with unruly teenagers and the whole thing. And it just felt like something I hadn't really signed up for. But I mean, that said, I was getting paid good money and,
sure.
Make hay when the sun shines. So I did my best.
Well, and to your point earlier, I mean, if it's a choice between cancellation and the show continuing in this altered way, I mean, the other calculus I would assume that enters in is like, well, it's not just me, it's all these other people whose jobs are on the line. And so let's at least give it a shot, right? I mean, I would assume that's the calculation you make.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, certainly for me, it was like, it again, what I said earlier, like the tone was just off. I was like, well, this isn't like the thing that I fell in love with, last year. And so it was unfortunate then to be like, and now it's gone, because it's like, well, geez, you changed it and it still didn't work, I mean, like at least before it was still working better, But I guess that's just how that's the industry.
Yeah, but it was a wonderful experience because I mean, the creator wasn't really the showrunner anymore, and everybody had to sort of eat a little bit of humble pie.
Yeah,
and it was a good, it was a good exercise in adaptability. I think.
Well, and I mean, I think the nice thing is that the show is still available out there. It's, I was watching it on the DC Universe app, and I was thinking, I mean, the cool thing, just by virtue of it being a DC Comics thing, like it will never fade away.
Oh God, it's there forever. Yeah. Oh yeah. So I can go to the Comic Cons now.
See that?
What do they call those things? Yeah, that's right.
You can go to Autograph Alley and.
I can go to Autograph Alley now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that is kind of cool. When you did something and that's the cool thing about those comic book shows or the DC comic world. It's like, yeah, you're like they don't just throw out comic books,
Yeah.
They're sort of stay around in this collective memory of people.
Yeah. I mean,
that's cool.
I think that in and of itself, like the human target will always be part of that conversation. So I think if nothing else, it lives on in that way.
Yeah, cool.
So as we wrap things up, I did want to spend a little bit of time talking about your podcast that you do called The Live Drop. And I've spent some time over the last week or so really taking in a whole bunch of episodes. And
oh, wow, thanks.
Yeah, you've got a big catalog, and I would love for you to, tell the audience about this. Like, how do you come up with this idea for a show?
Well, I was, it really came out of just some research that I was doing. And I was writing like a spec pilot for something, and it would take place in Berlin. I was stationed in Berlin, so it's always been like an area of interest for me. But as I started calling up some people and reaching out to some contacts that I had to get a hold of other people who were in the intelligence world, I realized, well, these are challenging people to talk to because there's a lot of things they don't want to say. And at the same time, there's also a lot of things that they do want to talk about or do want to come in out of the cold and talk about. So I felt like this would be pretty cool. And as I was doing these interviews, I started to feel like I was sort of picking up on a little bit of their, how would I say it? Kind of thirst for information, I suppose.
Yeah.
You know? So I started to think, would it be cool to have a podcast where somebody was actually just almost like like going about and getting information and meeting up with people, and the listener is actually the handler, the spy handler who's kind of listening to these transmissions that are coming in from this agent who's going out into that business and collecting stuff. So that was the original genesis of it, and now it's just it's kind of like the more you start researching into something, the more you find out you don't know. And then there's so many more things to be interested in or attract your attention with. So for me, it's been an interesting way to kind of sort of come out of the fictional world as like playing characters and being an actor, but getting into the real world and talking to people and kind of understanding the world around us. I think kind of using the angle of intelligence and spies and espionage and national security has just been like an interesting window into the way the world works and how we're trying to process all this much more information that we have now than, when I was younger.
Yeah.
So it's kind of ambitious, and frankly, I just talk to people that I think are kind of interesting. And now it's cool because people, if they have books coming out or they're like releasing a book about, in that genre, they'll let me know. They'll send me a book. I'll read it. I'll do an interview, and it's just a lot of fun.
Well, and it's worth mentioning, you and I are recording as the COVID-19 pandemic is really, this is the day we're really feeling the lockdown of just about everything. I teach at 4 different schools, and every one of them has closed down, and we're switching to online only. And I'm curious. I mean, what is your having delved into the world of intelligence and your own military background? What do you make of how this all is being handled right now?
It's funny. I also interview people for the Venda Museum. It's a museum of the Cold War in Los Angeles, and they have an oral history program. And I started doing some remote interviews for them as well. And I interviewed a guy who was he was at Chernobyl. Like he was one of the jumpers, like on top of the building that was kind of moving really quickly. And, he was in a reserve chemical unit. It was a reserve unit that suddenly just got called up, went to go to Chernobyl. And they didn't. So that was maybe a couple of weeks ago. So we were talking a little bit about, when information is trickling in and we don't know what's happening, how kind of frustrating it can be. And that's sort of the situation with that we're in with Trump. I mean, it's like a combination of Chernobyl and the movie Jaws.
Wow.
Where he just doesn't want this information
He's the mayor
to get out. And yeah, exactly. And how systematically it's just kind of affected the way people have been reporting and the initiative that people were taking to get ready. So it's kind of a mess, and especially his speech that he gave, which is reading from a teleprompter, and he's out of breath. And I mean, I can't really speak like from, the perspective of an intelligence officer or something like that. But, gosh, you sure wish that we'd had somebody who was kind of listening to his, career government professionals.
Yeah.
Especially when you're in a situation now where we're in like a real emergency, or there's like a real crisis that he can't just give a nickname and, slag on Twitter. It's something you really have to deal with. So it's kind of hard. But that said, if somebody tweeted something pretty funny, they said, I think that coronavirus 19 is going to be the final push for everyone in America to have their own podcast. I had to laugh. I think, it's probably right, because it's really, it's not a bad job to have right now.
Yeah.
While you're being quarantined or you're trying to do some social distancing.
Well, while you're holed up inside, might as well get on mic, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Mark, thank you so much for spending the hour here. This has been such a thrill. You talk about how exciting it is to act opposite Lee Majors. I mean, for me, to be able to spend an hour talking to the human target is just as cool.
Hey, thanks, man. Stay in touch. Life is short.
Once again, big thanks to my guest, Mark Valley, for joining me on this episode. Boy, we covered a lot. Like I said, again, you can check out episodes of Human Target via various streaming platforms. If you have DC Universe, it's there, both seasons, but you can also watch it on Vudu, and it's on Blu-ray. That second season is a little bit harder to find, but if you have DC Universe, it's there. And again, if you're looking for his podcast, it is The Live Drop, and if you do subscribe to shows, I would recommend checking that out. Real fascinating stuff. With that in mind, if you have any questions or comments for me about the show, please drop me an email at moviefilmpodcast@gmail.com. You can also hit like on our Facebook page, facebook.com/moviefilmpodcast. If you're looking for me, you can find me on Twitter at Zaki's Corner. That's ZAKIS Corner. And as always, please go to iTunes and leave a review, leave a star rating, not only for this, the Nostalgia Theater Show, but also for the regular Movie Film Show. Let us know how we're doing, and let us know what you'd like to see us do in the future. Thanks, everybody, once again for listening, and I will catch you next time here on Nostalgia Theater.